Remnants of the Past. Opening scene and setting. The story opens on a quiet Sunday morning in a picturesque, well-groomed suburban neighborhood on the outskirts of Boston, Massachusetts. Neighbors are out jogging or tending their lawns. The kind of community where everyone thinks they know everyone else's business. Margaret Evans, a 65-year-old widow, is introduced as she tends to her rose bushes. The death of her husband, Richard Evans, just 6 months prior, still casts a long shadow over her life. Their elegant home, filled with decades' worth of memories, now feels emptier than ever. Margaret's current life and personality. Margaret is portrayed as dignified, yet deeply solitary. Despite invitations, she rarely joins neighborhood book clubs or bridge nights, preferring her own company or quiet evenings with classic films. Her daughter, Emily, a young lawyer living in a distant city, calls often, but Margaret remains emotionally guarded. The wounds of grief are still raw and unspoken. Through Margaret's inner monologue, readers see her struggle to make sense of this new life. She sorts through her late husband's belongings, far from ready to let go. Inciting incident. The discovery. In the attic, searching for a misplaced family photo album, Margaret stumbles upon a locked wooden box. She hesitates, recalling that Richard was always cryptic about certain business matters. Curiosity overrides grief. She finds the key taped underneath Richard's old desk. Inside the box, she finds various old documents, property deeds, unfamiliar legal agreements, handwritten notes, and a safe deposit box key. At first, nothing seems amiss. But as she scans the names, dates, and signatures, small details catch her attention. Documents referencing a trust fund for Marcus Evans and Linda Evans. Names she vaguely recognizes as Richard's children from a previous marriage, whom she's long been estranged from. Atmosphere and emotional impact. The air seems to thicken with suspicion. Margaret's hands tremble as she reads more. The property she always believed belonged to her, or at least to her and Emily, appears to have been signed over to Richard's other children years ago. Overwhelmed by a sense of betrayal and confusion, Margaret replays her late husband's words. She recalls his vague assurances and the way he steered financial discussions away from her. First decisions and foreshadowing. Rather than confront Emily or anyone else immediately, Margaret chooses silence. She spends the rest of the afternoon compiling the documents, locking her bedroom door, and methodically making notes. Instead of acting impulsively, she resolves to learn more on her own before involving her daughter or alerting anyone to her suspicions. The chapter closes on a somber note, with Margaret sitting by her window as dusk falls, determined, frightened, and sensing that the peace she once knew will never be quite the same. The Veil of Truth. Margaret's restless state. The following morning, Margaret barely sleeps, her mind racing with questions and suspicions. She spends breakfast distracted, replaying every memory of her late husband's evasive responses regarding finances. As she brews her coffee, she glances at the pile of newly discovered documents neatly stacked on her dining table, feeling the pressure of secrets pressing in on her orderly life. The decision to reach out. Though she is fiercely independent and accustomed to handling things alone, Margaret realizes the legal language and complexity in the documents are beyond her. She wrestles with whether to involve anyone, especially Emily, knowing her daughter's career is demanding. Margaret drafts, then deletes, several text messages to Emily before finally sending a simple one. "Call me when you have a chance. It's important. Emily's arrival." Later that week, Emily calls and picks up on the tension in Margaret's voice. Despite a busy caseload, Emily drives several hours from New York to Boston, arriving one stormy afternoon. The reunion is affectionate but tinged with awkwardness. Both women are not accustomed to sharing vulnerabilities. Margaret is careful at first, offering tea and small talk, her mind grappling with how much to reveal. The first revelations. Over dinner, Margaret hesitantly introduces the subject of Richard's past. She steers the conversation to the found documents, but avoids accusations. Emily listens attentively as Margaret recounts her discovery. The mention of Marcus and Linda, names from a bygone era, immediately puts Emily on alert. Emily never knew her half-siblings, and Richard rarely spoke of them. Mother-daughter interplay. Emily's inquisitive nature as a lawyer emerges. She asks precise questions, wanting to examine every document. Margaret's initial reluctance is met with empathy, and she gradually lets Emily read through the paperwork. As mother and daughter sit side by side sorting records late into the night, Emily reassures Margaret that together they can make sense of it all. The dynamic shifts, their relationship moves cautiously from guarded to collaborative, emergence of doubt and determination. Emily explains various legal terms and highlights red flags. Unusual signature dates, outdated notarizations, transfers of assets to unfamiliar accounts, and the conspicuous absence of Margaret's name on deeds she thought were hers. The full implications start to sink in for Margaret. She suspects years of deception, possibly even betrayal, by the husband she trusted completely. Seeds of investigation. Emily proposes a plan. She needs time to make copies, check property databases, and quietly pull records through her legal contacts. She warns Margaret not to alert anyone, especially Marcus and Linda or their attorneys. For the first time, Margaret voices her feelings of devastation and anger, not just at Richard, but also at herself for having trusted blindly. Emily listens without judgment, validating her mother's pain. A new pact. By the end of the chapter, there is a solemn understanding between them. Margaret and Emily agree to keep their discovery private for now, determined to work as a team rather than mother and daughter with separate wounds. The chapter closes with Emily organizing the documents into numbered folders, Margaret writing down every question that comes to mind. The last lines hint at the gravity of what they are about to uncover. If the past was full of secrets, the future, for the first time, belonged to them. Legal traces. Emily dives into the paper trail. As the days pass, Emily transforms Margaret's dining room into a makeshift command center. Legal documents are spread across the table. Color-coded sticky notes mark key passages. Emily's laptop hums, screens filled with property assessment websites and databases. Margaret observes her daughter's diligence with a mix of pride and anxiety. She struggles to keep up but insists on being involved, meticulously taking her own notes and highlighting names from memory. Unearthing suspicious transactions, Emily cross-references the property deeds and bank statements. She locates a string of transfers made over the course of years, some predating Margaret and Richard's marriage, others surprisingly recent. Certain legal documents reference trust funds and irrevocable agreements naming Marcus Evans and Linda Evans, Richard's children from his first marriage, as beneficiaries. The discovery that the family home, long assumed to be Margaret's security, was quietly deeded to a trust managed by a distant law firm is a stunning blow. Piecing together the deception, Emily drafts an outline on a whiteboard, timeline, parties involved, amounts, and changes in ownership. She identifies patterns that point to a deliberate attempt to conceal assets from Margaret. They find evidence of Richard using shell companies and obscure legal clauses to gradually move assets out of Margaret's reach. Old emails and handwritten notes reference agreements kept away from prying eyes. The shadow of the stepchildren. As more paperwork is uncovered, it becomes clear that Marcus and Linda, Richard's children from his first marriage, have been the quiet beneficiaries all along. Both have recently made lavish purchases and investments, luxury condos, expensive cars, uncharacteristic for their known income. Emily obtains property records and financial disclosures, some through her personal network of legal colleagues. She establishes that both Marcus and Linda are closely tied to the trusts holding Richard's former assets. Margaret's growing sense of loss. Sitting quietly as Emily explains her findings, Margaret confronts not just financial, betrayal. But the reality that she may never have been part of Richard's long-term plans. The family home, heirlooms, and even collectible valuables may have been earmarked for others all along. In private, Margaret searches old family photos and letters, looking for clues she might have missed, moments when Richard appeared evasive or Marcus and Linda were unusually present. A legal roadmap emerges. Emily creates a binder of evidence laying out every transaction, signature, and clause. She builds a confidential case file labeled Family Trust, Anomalies and Irregularities. Emily explains their legal options: contest the trusts, challenge the will, initiate discovery of hidden assets. Each path is fraught with risk, cost, and emotional toll. A cautious first encounter. Marcus reaches out unexpectedly with a phone call. Casual at first, the conversation quickly turns tense when Marcus inquires about the house and asks after Dad's affairs. Margaret, alarmed, deflects but senses he somehow knows they are looking into things. Margaret and Emily decide not to reveal their suspicions to Marcus or Linda yet, but the call signals that they must act carefully and quickly. Preparation for a longer fight. As the chapter closes, Emily coaches Margaret on discretion. They develop a list of discreet questions for former lawyers and advisors, vowing to approach every contact with caution. The legal battle lines are quietly drawn. Margaret finds herself staring at the front door, feeling her own home is no longer a sanctuary, but the first front in a very personal war. Wounds and unity. The air in the Evans house felt different in the days following Marcus's unexpected phone call. Tension, once subtle, now settled over the rooms like a thick fog. Margaret found herself drifting through her routines, a walk in the backyard, sorting laundry, watering her roses, but the comfort these old habits usually brought her had vanished. Every chore replayed unwelcome questions. Every shadow suggested another secret she had failed to notice during decades of marriage. Emily had taken an unofficial leave from her law firm, citing a family emergency, and set up a more permanent post at her childhood home. Files and notes sprawled across the dining table, her laptop rarely closed. On the surface, Emily was methodical, highlighting precedent cases of contested trusts, making phone calls to contacts in property law. But Margaret could sense the strain in her daughter. Anxious pacing, absent-minded replies, the way her jaw locked when Margaret mentioned Richard's name. One wet afternoon, Margaret caught Emily standing motionless at the living room window, her shoulders tense, eyes fixed on the street as rain battered the glass. It was a domestic scene, both familiar and strange. Mother and daughter, together in the house again, but bound not by warmth or nostalgia, but by layers of grief, indignation, and a growing sense of crisis. Margaret hesitated before speaking, then quietly asked, "Were you very angry when you saw those names on the documents?" It felt like crossing a boundary to ask, but she needed to know she wasn't alone in her pain. Emily turned, startled by her mother's voice. "Furious, Mom. And I felt helpless. For you, for us, for everything Dad kept in the dark." She searched Margaret's face, as if recalibrating their relationship. Not just mother and daughter, but now allies in a betrayal neither had imagined. There was a silence between them, thick and complicated. Margaret's voice, when it came, was hesitant. "I keep thinking, how could I let this happen? Was I stupid, or was he just so convincing?" Emily shook her head. "You weren't stupid. Dad was careful. He knew how to keep things from you, legally and personally. This is about him, not about you." There was an edge of bitterness in Emily's voice, but underneath, a deep current of protectiveness for her mother. The unspoken years. That evening, rain still drumming the roof, Margaret found herself sorting through old photo albums with Emily. something they hadn't done since Emily was a teenager. Photos of holidays, family dinners, even a shot of Richard barbecuing in the backyard. Each image held a double meaning now. Margaret wondered for the first time, what else had she missed? As they turned the pages, the conversation shifted. Emily admitted, "There were things I noticed growing up. Dad traveling for business, phone calls he wouldn't take if you were in the room. I thought they were harmless at the time, adults' secrets." She glanced at Margaret, regret flickering in her expression. "I never imagined—" Margaret pressed her hand over Emily's, stopping her from flipping to the next page. "Neither did I," she said. "I thought I was protecting you all those years. Turns out, I was the one in the dark." It was a small thing, but the gesture, their hands together over family memories, seemed to bridge a chasm of silence that had grown since Richard's passing. Working as a team motivated by the painful clarity between them, the next morning they tackled the practicalities as a united front. Emily walked Margaret through a crash course in trust law, explaining not just legal terms but precedents and strategies. For the first time since this ordeal began, Margaret took copious notes, refusing to be merely a passive bystander. They developed a routine. In the mornings, Emily would follow up on leads, emailing lawyers, digging for property records, researching similar cases where surviving spouses successfully challenged unjust inheritance arrangements. In the afternoons, Margaret cataloged every significant event of her marriage, financial decisions, conversations with Richard, times when Marcus and Linda had unexpectedly appeared. She wrote down questions, doubts, and moments when she now realized her late husband had deftly redirected discussions away from specifics. Their evenings sometimes ended in heated debates. Emily, analytical by habit, would lay out scenarios, legally sound but emotionally taxing. Margaret, driven by a sense of personal betrayal, sometimes pushed for more confrontational approaches. But despite their differences in temperament and expertise, these sessions gradually brought them closer. Disagreements shifted from accusations to frank exchanges of fear, anger, and aspirations for justice, sometimes punctured by humor at their own expense. Doubt and resilience. But unity did not erase pain. Occasionally, Margaret withdrew into herself, gripped by self-blame or shaken by panic that she might lose her home. One sleepless night, she admitted, "I keep worrying, Em. What if we find out Richard hated me, or never really trusted me? What if, after all we do, we end up with nothing?" Emily answered without hesitation, taking her mother's hands in hers. "We have each other. That's not nothing, Mom. And he didn't hate you. He just couldn't be honest. If we lose the house, we'll still be together. If we win, we'll do it as a team." Margaret realized that for the first time, resilience was not something she bore alone. It was woven through every discussion, every late-night planning session, every tearful confession shared with her daughter. The loneliness that had defined her initial grief was being replaced with a hard-won companionship. Opening up to the world. Emily encouraged her mother to step outside, if only for walks to clear her head. On these strolls, Margaret confronted the sideways glances of neighbors who had always envied her perfect life. It stung, but she tried to hold her head high, internally repeating Emily's mantra, "We have each other." One afternoon, Emily accompanied her. As they passed a neighbor's house, the woman called out, "Margaret, if you ever need help with anything, just say the word." In the past, Margaret might have politely declined and retreated, but this time she managed a faint smile and replied, "Thank you. Maybe I will." This tiny act, an acknowledgement of both change and vulnerability, marked a shift. Margaret realized she could let down her guard, at least a little, and accept support, especially from Emily. A pact is forged. At the end of a week marked by tears, laughter, and moments of hard-won trust. Emily and Margaret sat together over cups of tea. "No more secrets between us," Emily said, raising her mug in a mock toast. Margaret grinned, raising hers. "Deal." Facing the world together. In that moment, Margaret no longer saw herself as a victim of her husband's deceit or as a solitary figure facing down a mountain of legal trouble. She saw herself as part of a partnership, one forged not only by shared blood, but by wounds revealed, pain spoken aloud, and a mutual vow to seek justice, whatever the cost. Outside, the rain had stopped. The air felt lighter, as if the house itself was breathing easier. For the first time since Richard's death, Margaret didn't dread tomorrow. She had Emily by her side, and together they were ready for whatever came next. Silent confrontations. The Evans house, once a safe haven, now carried an undercurrent of tension that never truly faded. After forging their pact of unity, Margaret and Emily awoke each morning with renewed determination. Yet their quest for justice was no longer a solitary search. The shadows of Marcus and Linda, ever more present, forced them to navigate carefully, like chess players anticipating every countermove. A trail of clues. Emily became increasingly methodical. She built a file on both Marcus and Linda, sketching timelines and cataloging connections. Through her network of legal colleagues, she learned that Marcus had quietly hired a real estate appraiser to estimate the value of the family home, a detail that sent chills through Margaret. When Emily discovered records showing Linda transferring assets to an anonymous LLC, it confirmed what they feared. Richard's children were carefully erasing traces, laundering family property out of reach. Margaret, determined to contribute, reached out under the guise of nostalgia to old friends of Richard or acquaintances from his previous marriage. Casual phone calls and subtle questions yielded slivers of information. A cryptic comment about Richard's legendary caution, a vague memory of family business meetings at odd hours. Margaret recorded these snippets in her growing notebook, feeling both invigorated and at times overwhelmed by the depth of deception. The first skirmishes. Neither mother nor daughter confronted Marcus or Linda directly. Instead, subtle maneuvers defined their encounters. Marcus called frequently, always under the guise of checking on Margaret's well-being. His tone was pleasant, but Emily, listening in from the other room, caught the edge in his voice when he asked about paperwork, home repairs, or whether anyone had been by to talk about Dad's estate. Linda, less direct, sent a string of overly polite emails about keeping the family together through difficult times. Each message, laced with passive-aggressive warmth, seemed meant to distract Margaret from the legal digging at hand. Emily began to sense surveillance. More than once, she spotted an unfamiliar car parked across the street, engine idling. Emails from a disguised address landed in her inbox, warning her to leave well enough alone. When she traced one of them, she found it led back to a law office long associated with Marcus's business dealings. Family tensions rise. The tension finally simmered over one late afternoon when Marcus showed up unannounced. Margaret answered the door, heart pounding, while Emily positioned herself in the hall to listen. Marcus, in an expensive suit, wore an easy smile, but he didn't set foot inside, lingering on the porch as rain threatened overhead. "Mom, I thought I'd stop by, see if you needed groceries. I can go check your mailbox, maybe make sure the locks are secure. Never know who's out and about these days." Margaret kept her composure. "Thank you, Marcus, but Emily and I have everything in hand. You're kind to offer, though." Marcus hesitated, then leaned in. "I hope you're not letting lawyers put ideas in your head. Dad's affairs were always complicated. He wanted everyone to be taken care of, but some things you just have to let be." The implication was clear. Margaret drew herself up. "Your father made his wishes clear to me in his own way. If you're ever worried, you can always talk to Emily and me directly. He gave her a careful look, his smile flickering. Of course, family first, right? Then he left, his footsteps brisk and his car skidding as he pulled away. Inside, Emily let out a breath she'd been holding. He's trying to rattle you, she said quietly. Don't let him. Uncovering deeper secrets. The next morning, Emily received a package containing anonymous documents, bank statements, property transfer records, and an unsigned letter warning. Look closer at 2009. Not everything is what it seems. The sender could only have been someone with access to Marcus and Linda's finances, possibly a disgruntled staffer at the law firm. As Emily sifted through the papers, she noticed irregularities from that year, a large unexplained withdrawal from Richard's account, and a property in Vermont transferred to Marcus's shell company for a nominal fee. They started hiding assets well before Dad's illness, Emily remarked, voice thick with frustration. Margaret, usually reserved, suggested boldly, "What if we confront the lawyer who handled these transfers? Maybe we play innocent, just two bewildered women looking for answers about their loved one. People say more when they think you're harmless." As planned, they scheduled an appointment under the pretense of updating estate records. The lawyer, an elderly man named Mr. Caldwell, met them in his corner office lined with diplomas and dust. He was polite, but when Emily asked detailed questions about the trusts and unusual property transfers, his cheer faded, and he grew evasive. Margaret, the portrait of genteel confusion, leaned in with innocent curiosity. "Richard always said he wanted us to keep the house forever. But these legal words, they're so hard to understand. Could you please explain them?" Mr. Caldwell hedged, offering only legal platitudes, eyes darting to the clock, as if to end the meeting quickly. Emily caught the undertones. They left knowing he wasn't telling the full story. Yet now they knew whom and what to watch. Conflicted loyalties and strength. Meanwhile, word of Margaret and Emily's inquiries filtered through the neighborhood. Neighbors who had once looked on the family with envy now spoke in hushed tones at book club or coffee shops. Some offered gentle support, others distanced themselves, wary of being swept into scandal. For Margaret, this scrutiny was both punishment and provocation. The sense of isolation was acute, sharper for being tangled with betrayal by someone she had loved for decades. Talking it out with Emily late at night became her lifeline, a way to process anger into strategy. "Do you ever think Marcus and Linda suspect what Dad really did?" Margaret asked one night as they pored over files. Emily was thoughtful. "Marcus might. Linda seems to think she's untouchable, but even she must know we're closing in. Legally, they're exposed, but people like them count on others being too tired, too scared, or too hurt to see things through." Margaret's hands shook, but not from fear. "We are neither tired nor scared," she said. A new resolve. They reassessed their strategy. Emily suggested pushing quietly but relentlessly, documenting every new inconsistency, setting up confidential meetings with potential allies, and being ready to escalate if Marcus or Linda tried anything bolder. Margaret's transformation was real. Where she once avoided creating trouble, she now found herself calling bankers, digging through receipts, piecing together the life she thought she knew. Emily, growing more protective, drew strength from her mother's quiet courage. As the chapter ends, they share a quiet moment in the kitchen, drinking tea, backlit by dusk through the window. The house, now full of questions, also brimmed with new energy, woven not of fear or loss, but of determination. Whatever storm was coming, neither Margaret nor Emily would face it alone, the price of truth. There was a moment, just before dawn, when Margaret would lie awake and wonder if exposing the truth was worth it after all. The secrecy had been suffocating, but the storm now brewing around her made the old ignorance seem almost peaceful by comparison. The neighborhood shifts. Within the upscale streets of their Boston suburb, word of the Evans controversy spread quickly. veiled beneath polite conversation and thinly disguised curiosity. At the local market, once friendly neighbors greeted Margaret with uncertain smiles, their eyes sliding away. The woman who used to stop and comment on Margaret's roses now hurried along, a forced brightness in her voice as she mumbled, "Hope you're holding up, dear." It was clear. The Evans name, once associated with stability and grace, now carried the tinge of scandal. Margaret felt the exhaustion of constant vigilance, always ready for another sideways glance or murmured remark. Friends who had once lingered for coffee now hesitated to visit. Even at church, Margaret sensed a subtle distance, as if the parishioners didn't know if kindness might turn into an obligation, or worse, entanglement. At first, Margaret tried to keep her head high, repeating Emily's words. "We have each other." But the toll wore on her. That strength started to feel like another mask. It became a daily negotiation between preserving dignity and confronting shame, both thrust upon her by Richard's secrets. Emily's burden. Meanwhile, Emily's world was evolving into a battleground of ethics and law. The days blurred together, court filings, phone calls with specialists, strategy sessions that ran late into the night. The legal tangle grew more complex as Marcus and Linda's attorneys responded aggressively, filing motions to dismiss and sending veiled threats. But what weighed most on Emily was the quietly mounting conflict within herself. She had always prided herself on her professionalism and strictly observed boundaries. Yet here she was, bending the rules of attorney-client confidentiality, using her insider knowledge for her own family's sake. One afternoon, as she sat in front of her laptop, drafting a reply to yet another snide email from Marcus's attorney, her firm's managing partner called. "Emily, we've received some inquiries about your involvement in the Evans Trust case. Please make sure you're keeping appropriate distance, family or not." Emily assured him she understood. She told herself she could walk the line, but the pressure gnawed at her. Would helping her mother cost her the career she'd worked so hard for? Could she live with herself if it didn't? The weight of exposure. With every legal turn, the case grew more public. Articles in neighborhood newsletters and local news sites began surfacing, gentle at first. Local family navigates unusual estate dispute, but soon tinged with speculation. Margaret's phone rang with reporters asking for comments, which she refused, but the sense of being watched grew relentless. Emily installed an extra security camera by the front door, a silent acknowledgement that privacy had become a memory. Social consequences followed quickly. Margaret learned that the book club she'd once declined to join had quietly removed her from their group texts. She found herself alone at the market more often, a noticeable exclusion that stung. Emily, too, noticed her invitations from legal colleagues drying up. She wondered if her career would ever recover from the shadow cast by her family's troubles. The final blow came when Margaret overheard her name in the bakery line. "Some people just don't know when to let the dead rest," a woman whispered. Margaret's cheeks burned. She realized then the price of truth was not just legal, but deeply personal. Lines in the sand. As the pressure mounted, so did opportunities for doubt. One night, while Emily was on the phone in the kitchen, Margaret sat silently by the window, sipping cold tea. She wondered aloud if maybe they should stop, let Marcus and Linda have what Richard had promised them. "I'm tired, Emmy. Maybe it's enough that we know the truth, even if no one else does." Emily listened carefully, her own exhaustion visible. "Mom, you taught me not to run from what's right. If we give up, we're letting Dad's choices define our future. I know it's hard. I promise, if it gets to be too much, we'll find a way to walk away together. But not like this. Not in defeat." That conversation sparked a new resolve. They could never return to the lives they'd once led. The only path now was forward, damaged but determined. ethics, and allies. The complicated legal fight brought unexpected moments of connection and clarity. Margaret received a letter from an old friend, a woman she hadn't spoken to in years, who wrote, "I know what it's like to learn your marriage was built on half-truths. If you ever want to talk, I'm here." That note encouraged Margaret to accept help when offered, and for the first time, reach out for comfort without shame. Emily's legal network, while largely silent, produced a quiet ally. A former law school friend sent her a copy of a precedent case, subtly implying which legal angle to pursue. Another colleague, risking their own reputation, forwarded a confidential memo that exposed a procedural error on Marcus's side. These small gestures renewed Emily's hope that, even in the bruising world of legal battles, integrity still mattered to some. Consequences for the unveiled. As Emily and Margaret pressed on, the investigation revealed how deeply Richard had woven his tapestry of deceit. Asset transfers went further back than anyone imagined. Old friends of Richard's disappeared from the record, while new names, lawyers, accountants, shell company proxies, surfaced. The more Margaret and Emily learned, the more staggering the cost of silence became clear. Not just the house, but the family legacy was in danger. But it wasn't just their own lives left in pieces. Marcus and Linda found themselves under new scrutiny. Their extravagant purchases and hidden accounts triggered audits. The courts began to look at the case with the seriousness it deserved. Even affluent neighbors, once sympathetic to Marcus and Linda, began to question their sudden fortune. A hard-won peace. Each night, as Margaret and Emily finished their latest round of research, they tried to find moments of normalcy. They cooked simple meals, watched the news, or took cautious walks together after dusk. The world wasn't kind, but the companionship they'd forged felt unbreakable. Margaret learned peace would not come from restoring her reputation or winning the house. It came from confronting the worst and emerging, scarred but whole, with the knowledge that hiding from the truth would have cost her even more. And for Emily, the struggle carved out a new sense of herself, a woman who could fight for what mattered without losing her moral core. As summer neared its end, the Evans home felt different. It would never be what it was, but the shadows that clung to its walls now shared space with something steadier. A mother and daughter, imperfect but united, who had dared to pay the price of truth. The volcano erupts. The pressure had been mounting for weeks, but the moment of true eruption was impossible to predict. A sudden, cataclysmic fracturing of everything the Evans family had kept hidden for so long. The first tremor was subtle, an unexpected knock on the door one humid afternoon. Loud and urgent enough to send Margaret's heart into her throat. Outside, Marcus stood with Linda at his side, both of them framed by the glare of early July sunlight. Marcus's face was drawn tight with barely controlled anger. Linda's arms were folded across her chest. Her gaze darted suspiciously from Margaret to Emily, who hovered protectively in the hallway behind her mother. "We need to talk," Marcus said, his tone leaving no room for niceties. "Now." Margaret hesitated, caught off guard by the bluntness. She thought of the documents locked in Emily's desk, the secret meetings, the neighbors' whispers, and decided she could no longer pretend. She stepped aside, and the two siblings entered, bringing with them the scent of heated summer air and the storm of reckoning that had been brewing for months. The family confrontation. The living room, usually a sanctuary, now felt like an interrogation chamber. None of them sat. Marcus set the tone instantly, voice barely contained. "I know what you're doing. Digging through Dad's affairs, making calls, trying to freeze the accounts. You think you can cut us out? Dad set things up the way he wanted. For the family, not just for you." Emily's calm was razor sharp. We're not trying to cut anyone out, Marcus. We want the truth. Mom should never have been blindsided by trusts and property transfers she didn't know existed. Linda finally broke her silence. You act like Dad was some villain. He took care of everyone. You just didn't pay attention. Something in Margaret snapped. The pain and humiliation of the past months rose to the surface, and her dignity gave way to anger. Your father kept things from all of us. Maybe you want to believe he was generous, but he betrayed the person he promised to love and protect. You two benefited from secrets and lies while Emily and I were left in the dark. Marcus's jaw tightened. We had no choice. Dad told us you'd be fine, that he had his reasons. He said you wouldn't understand. We didn't want to hurt you. Linda added, almost pleading. Dad made us promise. He was scared you'd take everything before he could make things right for us. Emily's voice was cold and clear. That's not how marriage or law works. You can't just disappear assets because you think it's fair. We want to make sure Mom is treated justly, and if that means this goes to court, so be it. The community watches. The argument turned, as always, to rumors and outside judgment. Marcus gestured wildly, glancing toward the window as if the neighbors were listening to every word. The whole neighborhood is talking about us. I hear it at the club, at the bank. Evan's family meltdown. You want to drag this through court? Embarrass all of us? Margaret's resolve did not falter. You're worried about embarrassment? Try living with betrayal and loss after a lifetime of trust. I'm done protecting his memory at the expense of my own future. Behind her, Emily quietly shuffled some papers. We found transfers going back over a decade, irregular withdrawals. A property in Vermont signed away for nearly nothing. Shell companies. We're not the only ones asking questions anymore. A court-appointed investigator will be reviewing every account. Silence filled the room. Linda seemed to shrink beneath the weight of exposure, while Marcus's bravado slowly unraveled. Secrets laid bare. Just then, the doorbell rang again. This time, it was a courier with a formal notice. Subpoenas for all involved. Emily signed for them, her hands steady but her face pale. Now it's official, she announced. All financial records, communications, and legal documents related to Richard Evans's estate must be turned over for discovery. Marcus exploded. This is what you wanted, isn't it? To destroy Dad's legacy? Drag us all through the mud? Emily shook her head, strangely calm. This isn't about destroying anything. It's about transparency, about fairness. We're not moving backward anymore. As tempers finally calmed, the siblings sat in wary silence. Everyone weighed down by the magnitude of what had just unfolded. The legal process was no longer hypothetical. Every secret, every lie, personal or financial, would be exposed, documented, analyzed. The fallout word spread rapidly. Within days, the Evans family was the subject of speculation in every coffee shop, book club, and country club lounge within a 10-mile radius. Margaret could sense the neighbors peering through their blinds as she walked to the mailbox, the air heavy with judgment and curiosity. At church, even the pastor hesitated before mentioning Richard's name in a sermon, uncertain whether to praise or avoid the Evans legacy. Old friends sent cautious messages of support. Longtime rivals relished the spectacle. Yet through it all, a few compassionate souls reached out, offering food or company without asking for details. Margaret, battered but unbowed, responded with honesty when approached. Yes, it's difficult, she told a friend. But sometimes you have to set things right, even when it means going through hell first. Emily's law firm tried to pressure her into stepping away to avoid a conflict of interest, but she stood firm. If I don't fight for my mother, what does all my training mean? Once privately anxious, she became a force, organizing documents by night, strategizing with outside counsel by day. Marcus and Linda, exposed and stunned, began to reconsider their allegiances and motivations. Quietly, Marcus confided once to Emily, "I never wanted it to get like this. I just thought we deserved some part of Dad's legacy. I didn't want you or Mom to lose everything, either." Emily listened. It's not too late to make things right, but it starts with honesty. And that's not just about money. It's about admitting what happened and why. A new path forward. By the end of that relentless week, battle lines were drawn. The Evans family was fractured, yet on the verge of transformation. The volcano had erupted, burning away false comfort and denial. In the ash, something new, if fragile, might one day grow. A future built on truth and the hope for forgiveness. Margaret and Emily stood together at dusk, looking out at the battered roses in the garden. The world had changed, and so had they. "Whatever happens now," Margaret whispered, "at least we know we fought for what was right." Emily took her mother's hand, a silent vow that through every eruption and every aftershock, they would face the consequences together. Choosing justice. The dust stirring in the wake of the confrontation still lingered, both in the Evans home and in Margaret's heart. Rumors had swept through their neighborhood and beyond, but inside, a quieter reckoning pulled at mother and daughter. The days after the eruption brought fewer arguments and more contemplation. It was as though voices in the house, once raised in anger or accusation, now echoed with uncertainty, frailty, and above all, the mounting cost of truth. A time for reflection. Margaret spent long mornings sitting by the kitchen window, tracing the outline of her tea mug while sunlight crept across the table. She replayed the argument with Marcus and Linda again and again in her mind, often wondering if justice was worth its price, or if she had simply traded one kind of pain for another. Emily, always alert to her mother's mood, encouraged her to journal, not just about the betrayal or the legal details, but about hopes, regrets, and futures she had once taken for granted. Each evening, Emily briefed Margaret on the practicalities. "Depositions are set for Friday. Everyone must testify under oath," she said quietly one night, her voice weighted with a fatigue she could no longer hide. "Our attorney has found a few inconsistencies in the original trust documents. I think we have a shot, Mom." But even as the case gained strength, both women understood that victory in court would not heal every wound the past months had carved. Margaret whispered fears she hadn't dared speak aloud before. If we win, what if the family is never whole again? Are we chasing justice or just revenge? Emily shook her head. Justice isn't revenge. If we back down now, everything Dad did will go unquestioned, and someone else's silence becomes our legacy. You taught me to stand up for myself, Mom. Let's do it together, even if it's hard. A final piece of evidence. One night, as rain beat against her bedroom window, Emily found herself drawn back into the mountain of files, searching for something she couldn't quite name. Flicking through scanned documents, she noticed a legal memo tucked among the older records, its pages brittle, almost translucent. Her breath caught as she realized what she was seeing. An unsigned side agreement written in Richard's unmistakably precise script. The document outlined his intentions for equitable division of the property, language that contradicted the supposedly irrevocable trust benefiting Marcus and Linda. The note was dated barely a month before Richard's final hospitalization. Its wording was informal but specific. I want Margaret and Emily provided for. I want no one left with nothing, especially not Margaret, who gave me these happy years. Emily's heart pounded as she showed Margaret the revelation the next morning. Margaret's eyes filled with tears as she read and reread the note. "Why would he write this and then hide it?" she asked, voice trembling. "Maybe he was planning to fix things," Emily replied gently, "but ran out of time, or the courage to face what he'd already done. This changes everything. We can challenge the trust directly. It shows Dad's actual intent, no matter what legal mechanism he put in place." A moment of decision. The house was silent as Margaret weighed her choices. She could use the letter as a weapon in court, ensuring the judge would see through the legal smokescreen constructed by Richard and maintained by Marcus and Linda. But she also knew that whatever shred of forgiveness the family possessed might shudder forever if she pursued this path ruthlessly. She pushed back from the table and stepped outside, feeling the late summer air on her face. The roses needed tending, so did her soul. She clipped away dead heads, reflecting on how life, like gardening, was a practice of cutting away what no longer served, trusting new growth would follow. Emily joined her, wordless, their silent routine now a source of comfort. "Do you want to go forward?" Emily asked at last, kneeling beside her. Margaret considered the question. For so long, her actions had been compelled by a sense of survival. Now, for the first time, she realized she was free to choose, whether to escalate, negotiate, or even forgive. "I want the truth on the record," Margaret said quietly. "Not to destroy Marcus or Linda, but so no one ever says we were silent or complicit. But I also want us to have a future, one not haunted by bitterness, negotiation, and compassion." When court reconvened, Emily and their attorney presented the handwritten note as new evidence. The court buzzed with curiosity and speculation as Margaret took the stand, her voice steady as she recounted Richard's duplicity and the toll it had taken on everyone. Marcus and Linda's attorneys blustered and objected, but when the handwriting analysis came back as a match, the judge allowed the document into evidence. During a break, Marcus found Margaret alone in a corridor. His expression was wary, equal parts sadness and regret. "We never wanted this, Mom. Linda's freaked out. All I want is to get some closure, move on. Can't we settle somehow?" Margaret searched his face, looking for malice and finding none. Only a deep exhaustion, the kind born from months of anger and legal warfare. "If you're ready to negotiate in good faith," she said, "I am too, but it has to be fair to everyone." It was not a fairy tale reconciliation, but a start. Emily and Margaret met with Marcus and Linda behind closed doors, their attorneys present but subdued. Over hours, they mapped out an agreement that honored Richard's last written wishes, divided properties equitably, and provided for Margaret's security, as well as the siblings' inheritance, all while agreeing to present a united, undramatic announcement to the community when the resolution came. A new kind of justice. The settlement, when finally reached, did not erase the past, nor did it miraculously heal old wounds. The town's fascination with the Evans family's downfall was already fading, replaced by a more complex story, one of scandal, accountability, and most of all, survival. Margaret laid her hand atop Emily's as they signed the final papers. "This isn't the ending I pictured, but maybe it's the one we needed." Emily smiled, exhausted but proud. "You chose justice, Mom, even when it was hard." That evening, after everyone had left, the house felt strangely quiet. Not empty, but at peace, as if it, too, had withstood the storm and come out, battered, but standing, on the other side. Looking forward, Margaret took a final walk around her garden as dusk fell. letting herself hope for gentler days. Her scars, like the roses, would always mark her, but the peace she felt was genuine. She had chosen justice, and with it, a future written by her own hand, not by Richard's secrets. Emily, packing away the last folder, met her mother at the door. "Ready to start again?" she asked. Margaret nodded. "With you? Always." Healing and the price of justice. The final paperwork had been signed, and for the first time in months, silence returned to the Evans residence, a comforting, living quiet rather than the suffocating hush of secrets. No more lawyers' calls or anxious rustlings of documents in the middle of the night. Margaret awoke on a crisp September morning to a house that felt, if not as whole as before, at least free of the sharp shadows that had haunted its halls since Richard's death. Legal and social consequences. Unfold. News of the Evans case, once fodder for gleeful neighborhood gossip, was now delivered in the flat tones of official pronouncement. The local paper ran a measured column summarizing the settlement. The Evans estate, long mired in discord, has been equitably resolved, honoring the handwritten wishes of the late Richard Evans and ensuring the continued stewardship of his widow, Margaret. It was as close to vindication as Margaret could have asked for, and though her name would always be met with a knowing curiosity in some circles, she no longer shrank from it. She wore truth not as armor, but as a badge. Marcus and Linda retreated from public view, their initial resentment softened to awkward civility. The spectacle of exposed privilege was over, but so too was the myth of a perfect family. Their lawyers paid their final invoices. Margaret's own attorney, steady, unflappable, sent a brief note. "You did right by yourself and by your future." Yet this victory was not without cost. Margaret had lost friends, some to petty judgment, others unable to witness the unraveling of another's life without fearing for their own. Invitations that once arrived weekly now appeared seldom, and always tentatively. "Perhaps you'd like to join us," an old acquaintance wrote, "if you're feeling up for it." Margaret accepted only a handful, choosing instead to use her time to reflect and rebuild. Family dynamics change, separation or reconciliation. The trauma of litigation had left its mark not just on Margaret, but on everyone it touched. Marcus and Linda were more distant than ever, wary and chastened, yet relieved that a truce had finally replaced months of cold maneuvering. For them, the prospect of reconciliation was real but fragile. They called occasionally, offering perfunctory holiday greetings or sharing updates about their own families, but rarely more than that. For Emily, the aftermath was a time of both relief and reorientation. Her career, though steadied by her firm's eventual support, had been changed. She no longer saw herself simply as an attorney, but as an advocate and daughter forever marked by the cost of family battle. The bond between mother and daughter, forged in fire, remained strong. If anything, the months of adversity had rendered them more candid, more trusting. Tea at the kitchen table became the day's sacred moment, a space for honesty unmarred by secrets or shame. One evening, Emily found Margaret in the garden, kneeling among the roses. Autumn air held a promise of renewal. "Do you regret any of it?" Emily asked. Margaret, brushing a bit of soil from her hands, answered thoughtfully. "I regret what was lost, but not what we found. I lost a version of my life that never truly existed. What I have now is real, even if it's messier or lonelier sometimes." The words lingered, as tender as the turning leaves. Healing, they both understood, would not mean forgetting, but accepting that scars were a consequence of standing up for oneself, the strength and solidarity of women. Through it all, it was the women, Margaret, Emily, and their small circle of supporters, who bore the heaviest burdens, but also reaped the deepest transformations. Neighbors who had once gossiped now saw Margaret differently. Some, emboldened by her example, began to speak more honestly about their own fractured families and hidden betrayals. Margaret discovered solidarity among women who had fought their own quiet wars. A widowed friend who'd navigated probate hell. A church acquaintance who'd been blindsided by her husband's debts. A cousin cut out of her inheritance yet determined to begin again. They met sometimes for coffee, to swap stories and gently, without pity, compare battle wounds. Emily, for her part, became a resource for those needing legal advice, but afraid to ask for it. She hosted casual afternoon meetings for local women seeking clarity on estate planning or prenuptial agreements. "Protect yourself," she'd say, "but don't let fear make you small. You have a right to know, and you don't have to do it alone." Margaret was proud to see her daughter step into this new strength, guiding others with compassion rather than cynicism. Together, they discovered that justice's price was steep, but its yield included dignity and the power to help others change their own stories. Reflections on the true cost. But the price remained. There were days when Margaret grieved, not for her reputation, but for the simpler joys that had been tarnished. Church services, neighborhood potlucks, even walks down oak-lined lanes were now accompanied by the low hum of awareness that she had shed her old, accommodating self. Some losses, however, were necessary. Margaret recognized that silence, too, is costly. That the peace she used to crave had been the camouflage for denial, for acquiescing to injustice. Facing the world with honesty was frightening and fatiguing, but it was also freeing. "I used to think forgiveness meant forgetting," Margaret told Emily one night as the first hints of winter set in, "or that it meant pretending nothing truly bad had been done. But now I think forgiveness is accepting what's done and deciding not to be chained to it anymore." A new kind of community. Slowly, the neighborhood and the Evans family itself began to reinvent what community meant. Where once it had demanded conformity and silence, it now, gingerly, allowed for difference. The Evans case faded from gossip, and Margaret's life receded from scrutiny. Those who still cared for her learned to do so with fewer conditions, less judgment. Margaret welcomed this newer, quieter place in her world. She took up volunteering at the local library, finding joy in shelved books and earnest conversations with strangers. Emily, never far away, continued her blend of legal work and grassroots advocacy, intent on helping other women refuse the comfort of ignorance. Moving forward, changed but whole. The autumn waned, and with it, the sense of holding one's breath. Margaret found herself able to plan for the future, not with the wild, unquestioned certainty of earlier decades, but with a wise hope grounded in reality. The Evans home began to buzz again with life. New recipes, fresh paint on old walls, laughter at the kitchen table. One evening, after a quiet dinner, Margaret stood at her window and looked out at the world, not as a survivor, but as someone actively choosing peace. The price of justice had been high, but the gains were undeniable. Truth, fellowship, and the quiet, ever-present bond between mother and daughter who had faced not just an opponent, but themselves. In time, Margaret understood that healing was not the return to what once was, but the forging of something altogether new and unbreakable. Peace after the storm. The first days of true peace felt unfamiliar. The Evans home, which had echoed with harsh words and anxious whispers for so long, now settled into a quiet that was finally restful. In the soft, golden mornings of late autumn, Margaret found herself waking with no sense of dread, just the sun filtering through lace curtains and the rhythmic whir of the old heating system. Emily, for the first time in months, slept soundly as well. The mountain of folders and legal pads had disappeared from the dining table, replaced by a bowl of fresh fruit and the gentle chaos of everyday life. Instead of reviewing legal precedents or bracing for the next email from opposing counsel, she started her mornings catching up with her mother in the kitchen over coffee and cinnamon toast. Building a new life. Day by day, Margaret and Emily reclaimed the house from its recent history. The office Emily had transformed into a war room now became her work-from-home space, filled with light and potted plants. They redecorated the living room, moving old photos out of storage and even daring to add new ones. Margaret and Emily laughing in the garden, a neighbor's dog playing at their feet, snapshots from a Saturday farmer's market. Each new photo was proof that life had not only continued, but was being remade. The roses in the backyard, battered by the summer storms, responded to Margaret's care with a final burst of color. She tended them with a tenderness that was new, born less of duty and more of gratitude. Some evenings she would sit on the small back porch, a mug of tea in hand, and listen to the world settle. The stillness was not empty, but full, echoing with layers of memory, pain, and new hope. Emily, too, found meaning in the small acts of restoration. She repainted her childhood bedroom, using cheerful colors she wouldn't have dared as a teen. Sometimes, without planning, she would pause in the hallway just to breathe, surprised at how unfamiliar happiness felt after months of battle. A changing neighborhood. If their home now felt like a sanctuary, the same could almost be said of the community outside. The Evans family was no longer the neighborhood's favorite subject of speculation. Instead, they became an example, someone to respect, maybe even approach for advice. Where once whispers followed Margaret at the grocery store, now the conversations began with true questions. How did you get through it? What would you do differently? Sometimes the brave ones asked for tips on drawing up a will or confronting a spouse's secrecy. Margaret, who had always kept a careful distance from gossip, now welcomed an honest coffee on a neighbor's porch. Some connections deepened, like with Mrs. Harper, who shared her own story of learning about her late husband's debts only after his passing, or with young Ana Ramirez, worried about protecting her mother from predatory step-relatives. Margaret listened gently, never seeing herself as a savior, simply as someone who had earned a patch of vulnerable wisdom. The block itself seemed to breathe a little easier. At Halloween, Margaret passed out candy with Emily at her side, and was touched when neighbors' children, once shy, now lingered by the door, drawn by warmth instead of pity. Mother and daughter, together, Margaret and Emily's relationship had been changed forever. But the distance between widow and daughter dissolved almost entirely in the aftermath. Their bond, built in adversity, now softened into something resembling friendship. They shared routines, yoga in the mornings, phone calls with relatives they'd ignored for years, Friday night takeout, and impromptu sing-alongs in the car. Difficult conversations about the past now mingled with plans for the future. Vacations taken together, home improvement projects, and the possibility of Emily more permanently relocating to Boston. More than once, they revisited their darkest moments, not to dwell on loss, but to measure how far they had come. Margaret sometimes admitted her fear that anger would have been all that remained. Emily, in turn, shared her worry that the law could harden even the best intentions. "I used to think strength meant hiding my pain," Margaret confessed one evening. "Now I think it means letting in help when you need it, and letting go when you can." Justice, truth, and the strength of women. Their journey had not only restored their sense of self, but awakened something larger. The knowledge that justice and truth are living things, sometimes costly, often messy, but almost always essential. Margaret joined a small local advocacy group advising women about estate planning, inheritance, and family trust. She became a quiet force for transparency and self-advocacy among the women in town, never lecturing, only affirming. Emily's legal work shifted accordingly. She volunteered for a pro bono legal clinic at a community center and resolved never again to steer away from hard conversations with clients about trust, secrets, and the importance of clarity in family finances. She spoke at a workshop titled, "Protecting Yourself, Protecting Your Family," her own experience lending authenticity and courage to her advice. They heard, over time, how their actions had motivated others as well. Several neighbors updated their wills. One married couple began couples counseling after years of silence about money. Margaret's story was told, often in hushed, respectful tones, not as a cautionary tale, but as a quiet call to honesty and self-respect. Letting the past rest. Looking forward. As the season turned, Margaret felt a sense of closure. She still missed Richard at times. His laughter, his presence, even the comfort of their routines before everything fell apart. But the pain of betrayal had softened. In its place grew something unexpected: forgiveness, not forgetting, but the deliberate release of resentment for the sake of peace. Her home had changed, and so had she. Where her identity had once been defined as wife, mother, or even victim, Margaret now moved in the world as herself, whole, independent, and finally fulfilled. On an especially beautiful December morning, Margaret and Emily decorated the mantel together, their banter easy and warm. Margaret paused, the sunlight glinting off a crystal ornament, and turned to her daughter. "Whatever storms come next, I know we'll be ready," she said. Emily smiled, her voice gentle. "We already have everything we need, each other." Outside, the world was quiet. The quiet of peace, not the calm before a storm. Margaret looked out over her roses and the familiar rooftops, feeling the strength of everything she and Emily had survived, and everything they were now free to create. Years from now, the Evans saga would be a memory shaped more by grace than by scandal. Justice had demanded everything of Margaret, but the peace that followed belonged wholly to her, and to the countless women who learned, through her example, that weathering the storm was only the start of what was possible.